Hello and welcome to the Product Marketing Festival. We have some fantastic sessions on the agenda for you today, but before we jump in, I have a very exciting announcement to make. The Product Marketing Awards are back for 2022 and I'm delighted to announce that nominations are now open. We received a whopping 181 New Yeek nominations last year, and this year we want even more PMM pioneers to be recognised. We have 7 top-notch categories for you to get involved in, and we can't wait to shout about the incredible product marketing talent within our community. The categories are Product Marketing Leader of the Year, Product Marketing Team of the Year, Product Marketing MVP of the Year, Product Marketing Newcomer of the Year, Positioning and Messaging Maestro of the Year, Product Launch of the Year, and Top Companies to Work in Product Marketing. Nominations are now open but must close on August 19th. So what are you waiting for? Spread the word, get your nominations in and celebrate those product marketing superstars that continue to go the extra mile. We'll be sharing a link to the nomination page in the chat throughout the day, so keep a lookout for that. We're also here if you have any questions, so please feel free to reach out via Slack or email. Now, after all the excitement, I just want to say a huge thank you to our sponsors, speakers, and you, our lovely audience, for joining us today at the festival. Please make the most of these sessions by asking your questions and sharing your feedback in the comment section of the video. So with that, let's get back to the sessions.
All right. Hi, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to this session, Shut Up and Listen, Conducting Effective Customer Interviews. My name is Anderson Campbell. I'm a product marketing manager at ZoomInfo, and I'm looking forward to spending the next 20-ish minutes with you, just discussing some of the things that I've found to be really helpful when designing and implementing customer interviews or user interviews. So let's go ahead and get started. First, why conduct customer interviews at all? Why is this something that product marketing managers do? Well, central to our mandate is to capture the voice of the customer. And customer interviews is a great way to literally capture the voice of the customer. So a few things. There are a number of different kinds of customer interviews that you might be asked to undertake or that you might find yourself wanting to design. The very top level is just to understand the buyer and user personas. And this is what I think a lot of us think about when we're designing customer interview projects. But there are a number of other different things that we might be asked to do as well. UI, UX design interviews, usually partnering with somebody who is working on the design side with product. Customer satisfaction interviews, you get those NPS scores back and you want to interview both those that are loving your product and those that are your detractors, trying to understand what's driving product usage or adoption, or maybe what's not driving usage and adoption, and understand how your customers are using the product. Conducting win-loss analysis is something that a lot of product marketing managers do for the company. Then finally, interviewing your own sales staff to understand what the sales process is, getting feedback from the sales staff, and being able to collate that and present some key findings. There are a lot more than just these 6 things that you might be asked to do or that you might think would be helpful in terms of interviewing customers. These are the ones that I've found most common in my work as a product marketing manager. So we're going to explore a number of different things today. We're going to look at questions, basically, from what do I want to learn to how do I design the interview itself? How do I get people to show up? And you can read the rest of those that are there. So why don't we just go ahead and get started? So what do I want to learn? Defining your interview objectives, I think, is key before you start on any kind of interview project. You want to understand why it is that you're going to get in touch with customers in the first place. I love this quote by Zig Ziglar: if you aim at nothing, you'll hit it every time. And if you're finding that you're conducting customer interviews, but you're just never really sure what the takeaways are, you don't find consistent themes, it's likely because you haven't defined clear objectives from the outset. I think SMART goals, which a lot of us use for objectives and KPIs, SMART goals work really well for customer interviews also. So defining what you want to learn in a way that is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time specific. All of those criteria are really helpful when you start to explore a customer interview project. And you want to define as specifically as possible the who, what, when, where, why, and how of your customer interview project. So all of those journalistic or writing tips about getting specific, those work really well here as customer interviews. This is an example from just this week of an interview project that I'm working on spinning up with some of my product managers and design folks. And you can see we have a working document. We're already getting into some of the goals, the user criteria, a pre-interview survey we want to do, the interview script. And even though we've started getting pretty specific, I'm in the comments over on the side pushing us to get more specific. When we talk about users, how many do we want to interview for this round? Trying to get a gauge of, what would make the product team feel comfortable that we did a substantive interview project here. So you can see it's 10 to 15 would be good. And this is going to inform the number of people that I then reach out to have 10 or 15 completed interviews by the time that we're done. Another thing that I'm pushing us on, how long do you want these interviews to be? This is going to help me inform the ask and whether I need to incentivize this interview project or not. And we'll talk about that in a moment as well. So the more specific you can get, the better your success rate is going to be with understanding what you're trying to drive at in the interviews and being able to present some key findings that come from the data. So what are you going to ask when you are in these interviews? You've defined your objectives. Now, how do you turn those objectives into actual conversation? I suggest you make an outline of what you want the interview to look like. And over on the right there, you can see an example of an outline that, the part of an outline that I came up with. So start with those objectives, those things that you just defined, write those out on your interview outline, and then brainstorm everything you could ask a user or a customer or a prospect, everything you could ask them that would help to probe those objectives or those topics that you're wanting to explore. And once you have brainstormed everything that you could ask, and here I find question banks to be really helpful. I've started developing my own question banks for the different kinds of interviews that we looked at a few slides ago. The PMA actually has some wonderful question banks on their website. So if you're a member of the Product Marketing Alliance, I would suggest that you go to the site, just put in one of the search bars, question bank or persona questions, and they have a really great interactive table that allows you to call up a number of great example questions for different kinds of things you might want to find out from persona research or from user research. So take some of those and start building your own question bank. Distill those questions that you could ask down into those that you must ask. I have found for interviews in the 30 to 45 minute range, I don't want to ask more than 3 to 5 questions. Now, I know that sounds low, but those 3 to 5 questions are the key tent stakes that I want to be staking out the corners of this interview so that I know that I'm going to have some consistency there. There will be follow-up questions and conversation that we do in between those big key questions, but I want to make sure that there's some consistency driving these interviews. So 3 to 5 questions and then maybe some others kind of in the kitty that I can hold off to the side if the person is very concise in their answers and responses and we have some extra time. For those questions that are demographic or firmographic or technographic about the person's job or workplace, consider sending them out a pre-interview survey to capture that data. That way you have that data. It is getting pushed into usually a form or a spreadsheet, so it makes it much easier to collect and collate, manipulate later. And you don't waste time in the interview asking things like, can you remind me what your job title is? And what are some of the things that are in your sales tech stack? Like, you don't want to waste time on the interview asking stuff that could be answered with just some radio button selections or drop-down button selections. So send out a pre-interview survey to get those questions out of the way. And then order your questions by order of importance. What are those that are key to understanding your objectives and to meeting your objectives? And what are those that would be nice to have if you have time? Make sure that your questions are open-ended. By this, I mean questions that cannot be answered with a simple yes or no. And this is where you need to assess each one of those questions and say, is there a way I can make this question more open-ended? Because you want them to supply the reason. You want them to supply the context. That's where you're really gathering their voice in this project. So a couple of examples. Instead of asking, do you use Salesforce? It's a closed yes or no question, and you'll learn exactly one thing. You won't learn what their CRM is. You'll just learn whether or not it's Salesforce. You might want to open that up and just ask, what CRM do you use? Similarly, instead of asking them, do you like it? That's a yes or no question. They might not supply any extra context. You might have some open questions to follow up. What does it do well? What do you wish that CRM did better? So those are things where they get to supply the context and give you some reason for why they do or do not like that particular CRM or whatever it is that you're exploring. You get the idea. Open those questions up as much as possible to get the other person talking. Now, how do you get people to show? What does outreach look like? Well, first of all, when I'm doing email outreach, and this is primarily how I book my interviews, I plan for a low response rate. And there's a number of reasons for this. Usually it's a cold outreach. I'm reaching out to people who have never heard of me before. They are familiar with my company. Usually they're customers of ours, but they don't know me. So I know that a lot of those are either going to go to spam or they're going to get ignored. And that's fine. I don't take that personally. That is just the way that we operate in email. So I tend to invite 10 to 20 times the number of people that I want to actually have show up for interviews. So 10 to 15, I might invite 20 or 30 or 40 people in order just to book the number of interviews that I'm trying to get for this particular project. And sometimes it's going to take even more than that. Don't take that personally. Just know that you're going to need to start with a much bigger pool of qualified users or interview prospects than you actually will need to book. And there will be some attrition there, though all those that book will not show up. Don't take that personally either. People get busy, plans and schedules change. In the outreach itself, be a human being. Try to strip all of the marketing language out of those emails. You are one human contacting another human to ask for a conversation, and make sure that that comes across. And you can do that by being clear with your ask. Just get right to the point of why you're getting in touch with them. You want to have a conversation with them about fill in the blank, whatever that thing is. Supply to them why you're reaching out to them. Give them the context, like why did they qualify as an interview subject, why you're reaching out to them now, and what you're asking them to do. And then make sure that the next step is very clear as well. What is it that you want them to do after they've read this email and said, yeah, I want to help out with this? Do you want them to reply to the email? Do you want them to sign up on a sign-up sheet somewhere? Are you going to push them over to an automatic scheduling tool? Make that very clear, and that's your one call to action for this particular email. And then be persistent. And this isn't crazy persistent here. I found that just 2 to 3 touches over a business week or 5 to 7 business days is enough. If you just do one and done, then those people that it just hits their inbox at the wrong time, they're going to miss it. They may even look at it, preview the email on their phone or something and say, oh, I want to remember to get back to that. And then they don't. They might be interested. So that second or third touch is good. I found that beyond a third touch, there's really no return on the outreach at that point in time. It's not like if I do a fourth or a fifth that I get more interview respondents. So just 2 or 3 over the course of a week, and I think that that's persistent enough. Now, do you incentivize these interviews or don't you? Well, in my experience, that kind of depends. There are those that are intrinsically motivated. These are people that you're reaching out to that might be part of your early adopter program or part of your customer advisory board. These folks have already raised their hand to say, I'm interested in providing you feedback and helping in product development and helping your company iterate. So they may not need some sort of incentivized reason to show up to the interview because they're intrinsically motivated. But for most other people, some sort of extrinsic motivation might help them to commit or might help them to show up when the thing pops up on their calendar later. That could be anything from cash to a gift card to a drawing for some sort of prize. If they're in the admin user or the main point of contact or decision maker kind of bracket, and that's who you're trying to reach out to, then often something that is connected to the usability of the product is more of an incentive than some sort of gift card or swag. And so if perhaps your product operates off of credits, if you give them or offer them credits to have an interview with you, instead of a gift card, that might be a better extrinsic motivation. So you can even think in terms of kind of product rewards that way. But if you're going to incentivize, set that budget at the very, very beginning when you're defining those objectives. Understand how you're going to incentivize the interviews and where that budget's going to come from. Now, what does an actual interview look like? Well, let me give you just some do's and some don'ts, because this can vary greatly from person to person and org to org. But these are the things that I've found to be helpful. So first, do introductions. It may have been a while since they actually booked the interview with you. Maybe several weeks have passed. So remind them of who you are and your role in the company. And if you have other people from your team that have also joined the interview, you're going to want to introduce them as well, or have them introduce themselves, so that everybody on the call knows who everybody else is. Review the purpose of the interview. This is showed up on their calendar. Maybe they read the calendar description, maybe they didn't. Just give them a reminder of what it is that you're asking them to do with you during that time. And then get cracking at it. Don't delay any longer. You want to get on with the interview. Don't waste time, and start getting through that interview agenda or that interview outline with those open questions that you have crafted, and stick to those questions. It can be really tempting, I think, once you've got a live person there, to let the conversation spin off in a number of different unrelated directions. But one of the things that you'll find is most helpful is that you have consistency in the interviews, in the questions that you ask, in the space that you create, because you can actually extract some key findings from these qualitative type interviews if you're consistent in the interview process and structure itself. Practice active listening. Be one of those people that looks directly into the camera instead of looking over at the screen or down at your notes. Be one of those people that gives the head nod on camera, gives the little, oh yeah, I understand. Those little verbal cues that are not interruptions, but let the other person know that somebody is engaged with them. You all know what active listening looks like. Just be sure that you are at your best active listening game. Also allow for silence. Sometimes our first response to a question isn't our best or most complete response. So allow for the other person to think for a moment. Especially helpful for people that might be a little bit more on the introverted side of that introversion extroversion scale, that they need a moment to collect their thoughts and gather their words before they put that out. So when you ask a question, allow some space. And then at the end of the interview, thank them and follow up. And I suggest following up as soon as possible, especially if there's an incentive that they've qualified for. Let them know how they're going to receive that incentive. If there were any action items that you mentioned on the call that you were going to do as a result of the call, go ahead and complete those, or use whatever scheduling method you need to make sure that those don't fall through the cracks. In terms of don'ts, some things to avoid during the interview. Don't overdo the small talk. Introductions are great, but they can eat up a lot of time. You don't want to go 5 or 8 or 10 minutes into a 30-minute interview and you're still talking about introductions and what kind of connections you have to different places in the world with the other person. You want to get moving on the actual interview itself. Don't deviate too far from your outline. There will be opportunities for you to go down rabbit trails that are going to yield some fruit, but be judicious about that. Just every interesting thing that comes up is not something that necessarily needs to be explored on every call. Don't be a Jedi. And by this, I mean, don't feel like you have to justify, explain, defend, or interpret your product for someone else. It can be really easy when somebody is dissatisfied or frustrated to feel like you have to come in and do brand control. This is not an opportunity for that. You need to let them be frustrated if they're really frustrated, because you need to capture that voice as well. You need them to feel free to articulate to you, a representative of the company, what their frustrations are. So don't be a Jedi, justify, explain, defend, or interpreter of the product for them in these customer interviews. Similarly, and this one's hard for me, don't turn it into a training. I come from a teaching and training background. And so sometimes when someone's struggling in the product to show me something, or they're describing a method of utilizing our products that is just highly inefficient, it's really easy for me to want to lapse into a training and just show them a better way to do it or a correct way of doing it. Don't do that. You need to see them struggle and allow them to struggle. That is valuable feedback, especially if it happens across multiple users. Valuable feedback to provide back to the product team, and for you as a product marketer to understand how you're positioning and marketing and messaging the product and the training of the product itself. Don't bail them out too quickly by supplying answers to their questions or words they might be looking for. Remember, your role in all of this is to capture their voice. It's not to speak for them. So let them talk. That's where the whole title for this session came from: Shut Up and Listen. Now, how do you capture that feedback, that voice of the customer? Well, I have a few tips on being present in the interview. First, record. If at all possible, record your interviews, whether they're in person or, like most of us are doing them these days, virtually. Record, record, record. The conversation focus is on them. It shouldn't be on you and your note taking. It's very hard to be an active listener if you're trying to scribble down everything that they're saying. Recording allows you to do that kind of assessment later. I use Chorus AI. I think it's a wonderful tool. It allows me to capture the meetings right in Zoom. It records them. It does a very accurate transcription that I can refer to later. There's a built-in note taker app. So if I do want to take a couple notes, or if I want to at mention one of my colleagues and notify them automatically of something in the interview, I can do that on the side, and it's going to timestamp that. And then I can access those comments later on in my assessment. So using a tool like Chorus is really, really wonderful, because it allows me to take minimal notes and be present in the interview. And then afterwards, I can fire up Chorus and I can go to the interview itself, and I have access to all of those notes that I took over on the right. They're timestamped. I have access to a highly accurate transcription. I can just go copy and paste customer quotes all day long. Very, very helpful. And then what I end up doing is, I'm pretty old school, so I just start to collate all this information in a spreadsheet. I take my notes, those kind of customer quote excerpts, and I start pasting them into the different questions that I was asking, so that I have columns for interview for the different questions or sections of the interview, and can then start to look for common words or themes or phrases in the feedback as I put all of the interview findings in front of myself in one place. Store the recordings for future access for yourself and others. Put those in a folder somewhere if you're doing it on your own machine. For me, in Chorus, it allows me to create a playlist, and I can share that playlist with anyone else and just add recordings to that playlist. Then I've got all of my interviews all in one place and one link that I can share out to my different stakeholders and collaborators. So once you have started to gather those findings together, how do you present those? What does an executive summary or deck look like? Well, the goal of that summary or deck is really to give an overview of the common themes, an overview of the project itself, and then to get right into some key findings or takeaways or recommendations substantiated with the customer's voice, with user quotes. So first, you have to assess all of those notes that you've taken. There's a bunch of different methods that you might find for doing this. Again, because I feel like I'm kind of old school, I do this all in a spreadsheet. I just color code stuff. As I start to see something popping up over and over again, I'll just give it a color, and then I start flagging it with that color every time I see it in an interview. And then I just sort those on a new sheet. And then I can see really easily by color which one has gotten the most traction, and kind of descending from there. And that helps me come up with what were my top 3 or 4 or 5 things that came up in these interviews that I need to include in this executive summary. In terms of the summary itself, I usually do a doc or a deck. It really depends on the person I'm presenting to and what they want to have. If it's a document, it's going to be just a couple of pages long. A deck may be 6 or 7 slides. In that, I recap the objective of the interview project and the process. We review a little bit about the subjects themselves. I present 3 to 5 key recommendations or findings substantiated with quotes, or from Chorus, I can just take a snippet of the interview and generate that little clip and embed that right in the slide of the doc so that they can hear it. And then I include a pretty substantive appendix of all of the different materials that I used, the raw data itself, links to the interview materials, the analytical work that I did. So if somebody wants to do a deeper dive on how I came to those key findings or recommendations, they want to listen to some of the interviews, that's at their fingertips as well. So let's look at a couple examples of some work that I have done with customer interviews over the past year or so. This is a goals slide from one of the executive summary decks. This was from some user research that a UX UI colleague of mine and I did. So we talked about, we wanted to understand a persona, we wanted to present a particular package. Those were the 2 goals for that project. We talked about the methodology. Again, this is a summary slide. Incentivized interviews, how many we did, when we did them, breakdowns in terms of the interview and the different groups, the different rounds of interviews that we did, who the research participants were. These were our interview subjects. A lot of this was data that I crunched from the pre-interview survey. And then we showed a breakdown of the participants by management level and job function, their time as a user, the type of company that they worked for, what segment that was in. So we could show that we were using kind of a broad swath of different kinds of people who met our criteria. We looked at the tech stack. We wanted to understand some key things about different kinds of products that they were using. This is going to inform our product team how to prioritize some things on the roadmap for that product. And then this is another example. Example number 2 here is from a sales internal interviews I was doing with salespeople on why we win and why we lose deals for a particular product. And this is an example of one of those key findings slides. So this one is that good prep and discovery make or break deals. And you can see here that it's very clear what the takeaway is. And I have a couple of user quotes here. These are actually salesperson quotes. And I click on those and they'll play right away. So just that little snippet. So it's not my voice saying that good prep makes or breaks deal. It's actually the salespeople themselves. I'm bringing their voice right to these slides here. Same thing with this slide here. A few other different quotes that they could click on and hear these salespeople talking about it with the context. Another thing that I've prepared that's not a deck is an executive summary, more in a doc. And this is really, it's an 8 or 9 page doc here, but only the first 2 pages of the summary itself. So here you see 1 paragraph summary of what the project was, and then the themes with substantiating quotes. And then we get into recommendations based off of those quotes, and then start to get into some of that appendix material about the interviewees, the interview summaries, notes on each interview. And that just goes down the line with all 12 or 14 interviews that we did for this particular one here. So now that you've completed it, the interview, you've done some executive summaries, you've presented your findings, how do you prepare for the next round? This is all about reflecting on this. So seek feedback from your stakeholders. This could be people that you collaborated on the project with. It could be people that you actually conducted the interview with, or the people you presented your findings to. Ask them open questions. What went well? What did you find most valuable? What was missing? What did you find unhelpful? And write that stuff down. Try not to take it as a personal critique. They're not critiquing you. You're asking for feedback on the project and the process. And then ask yourself the same questions. Reflect on your own experience in all of this. Write all that stuff down, and then go back to it and read it again before you start prepping for your next set of interviews or your next interview project, because this reflection is only helpful if you draw on it for the future. So what are my key takeaways? My key takeaways for our session together today is to first have good objectives, begin with the end in mind. Create space in the interview questions that you write and in the way that you conduct the interviews for the other people to talk. Remember, shut up and listen. Summarize those key findings and takeaways. You don't need to present everything plus the kitchen sink. And then reflect on the process itself and see what you can draw out to learn for the next round of interviews. All right, I know that that was a lot, and there's a lot more that we could explore together. I thank you for your time and for your attention. I would love to be connected with you professionally, so look me up on LinkedIn, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you, everybody.